Just a quick word of why I'm up here doing this. I have had experience with quite a number of these various translation management systems, deploying in different systems, and that's sort of how you get to be a consultant, I think. The old story of how you make a deployment go well says, well, you have to make good decisions. Well, how do you make good decisions? Well, you have to have experience. Well, how do you have experience? Well, you have to make bad decisions. So I've made enough bad decisions that I've got enough experience that maybe I can help you avoid some of those. So the first thing I want to do is talk about this animal called a TMS, a translation management system. What is it really? And there are a number of components that I've sketched out. This is too busy. In fact, I have an interesting feature of my system here that I'm not going to be able to correct easily, so I'll just have to talk about it. I'm sorry. But there are several aspects of a translation management system that in theory are part of the system. Everything from workflow management, your supporting project and sales staff. Off the right edge of that diagram that's too busy to read is where the customer is with the customer relationship management and a customer portal. And then at the bottom you have your job submission and eventually a collaborative translation environment and so forth. Various databases that support that, because there's everybody from the operations staff, sales staff, financial management, your vendors, your customers, who are all interacting with this thing. And if you look into the marketplace, there's sort of two circles of focus that have grown up, not to the exclusion of other options. But there's one that really focuses around the translation environment itself. They're referred to sometimes as CAT tools or as TENS, translation environment tools. And these are things like MemoQ, MemSource, SDL Studio, Trados, that sort of thing. And some of those, especially the SDL Studio and MemoQ, are expanding a little bit beyond that to do some of these other things. But they're really focusing on managing the language part of the task. And then the other part is really up here focusing on managing the workflow, managing the business of translation rather than managing the translation itself, if that makes sense. And these are things like XTRF and PluNet and a host of others. And all of this I'm talking about from the LSP perspective. I'm leaving out completely the kinds of translation management systems that large companies might buy from Multicorpora or Across or OnTram or others. And if you have to use one of those in your system, it's because your customer tells you to use it. It's not because it's really best for an LSP. So I'm going to talk a little bit about deployment issues there. This is a picture I've used before, and the goal of a TMS, the vision, if you will, is to go from this flood of emails and paper and telephone calls and versions of files and cutting and pasting and whatever all else that drives us crazy, and by the way, doubles or triples the cost of translation, and go to this nice smooth thing where the customers are doing their data entry for you. Assignments are happening either automatically or semi-automatically based on the rules you set up. The files transfer easily. You've got a collaborative platform maybe for the translation, so you never have to worry about which translation goes with which source file and that sort of thing. And the project manager is really like the orchestra conductor. He does have a job to do, but it doesn't have much to do with managing files. And most of a project manager's job in our traditional business is really more of a file management job than a project management job. We don't have time to look for risks and avoid late deliveries and things like that because we're busy chasing the bits and bytes. So this is a rather disturbing chart. This comes from a recent Common Sense Advisory report on TMS users revealed. This shows that 15% of people who bought a new translation management system deployed it within 3 months. And 41%, I'm sorry, less than 1 month. 41% did it in 1 to 3 months. So within 3 months, you have about half the people who are done with their deployment. And that's not unreasonable. It doesn't happen automatically, but it's not unreasonable. But the disturbing thing here is that you've got a quarter of them almost who took another 6 months before they got it done. And then it goes on so that there's nearly a quarter of them that still were not done after 2 years, after 1 or 2 years. So it's the sort of thing that is much more complicated than people realize it is. And if you think about things that are hard to do, the best way to make a hard thing to do last longer is to not know what you're doing. It's to go slow about it. It's to underestimate the task. If we've ever had assignments in college and we had to spend all night staying up to finish them because we didn't plan ahead, It's that sort of thing. What I want to do, we have this phrase in America, at least in the southern part where we have swamps, that when you're up to your elbows in alligators, it's easy to forget that you came to drain the swamp. So sometimes we use other body parts besides elbows. But what I want to do is talk a little bit to you about this draining the swamp of deploying a TMS. I want you to take away a few things that should make this a little bit easier for you if you're going down that path. And then, of course, there are going to be some presentations from PluNet and XTRF later on that will help you to kind of put that in context. But the first thing about this is, when you get started trying to choose a translation management system, you have to figure out which part of that big block you actually mean by the word translation management system. You have to, if you think about it as a map, if you don't know where you are, the map is not going to help you get where you're going, right? You have to start someplace, and you have to start with your current status and what are the problems you're facing. Is the problem that you're facing that you have translators who are using all sorts of different environments and you're having to put it together and you're always late delivery because you're just managing those files? Maybe you need to start with a collaborative translation environment and continue to use, a pencil and a pad of paper to keep track of your invoices for a while. If, on the other hand, your translation is going well and efficiently, but you can't tell whether you're making a profit, then it might be a good idea to spend some time on the business management side of things and understand that better. And you need to understand both your current needs and where you think your business is going. You have to then look at what your options are in terms of what you already have, and you have to decide, is this an opportunity for me to spend a little bit of money on a smart programmer to build on what I already have, or is it time to realize that I really can't keep doing this forever and I need to let the professionals sell me something and then adopt my processes to that? So all of that takes some thought and planning and time, and a lot of these people on the right end of Ben Sargent's chart are people who didn't think about that before they jumped in. And by think about that, I mean this concept of counting the cost, really understanding what it's going to take to get from here to there. And there is a lot of cost of change. You're not going to get there without training. I had a conversation with a TMS vendor and one of my clients just recently where I'd been telling the client for some time they were underutilizing the translation management system. They weren't getting their money's worth out of it. They were essentially using it as an invoicing system only. They weren't automating the workflows. They weren't really using any of the power of the system. And so we got the vendor on the phone to give them a 1-hour training session, and the vendor told them about the same thing. And so they came back to me later and says, we've been thinking about this, and we don't think we're using the system to its full potential. Good. See, that's what a consultant does sometimes. It points out the obvious. But you really have to understand that. And more than that, you have to understand that your processes are going to change. Think about it for a minute. Your processes that you currently use work, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be in business at all. Now, they may be slow, but they work. They get the work done. If they also point out to you that you have to change some of the technology to improve, wouldn't it make sense that the processes have to change too? I mean, you have to say, what does the new technology give me? And how do I take advantage of it? How do I leverage that to make a difference? Otherwise, I'm making maybe small improvements, but nothing that justifies the time and energy. So I'm going to have to change my processes. It's going to affect my customers. It's going to affect my vendors. In the situation I referred to earlier, the company sent out an email to all their customers saying, we have a new customer portal, please use it. And one of their customers did. Now, if your customer uses a customer portal, they do all your data entry into your data system for you. You don't have to do it. They submit their project to you. You don't have to do it. Their project files get dumped directly into the right place in the translation management system, so they're ready for you to take the next step. So it would really be worth your while if you're going to spend all this money on the system to convince your customers to use it, but they're not going to use it because you sent them one email on some Thursday and then never followed up. And the same, of course, obviously with vendors. And many of you are vendors, either as individual freelancers or as project managers or account managers for a single language vendor. And you know that just having a new system sprung on you by one of your customers, whether it's an MLV or an end customer, can be a little uncomfortable. Неудобно, they say. And so you have to look at it from both sides and make sure you bring your vendors along, because once again, the real power of this system is streamlining the interactions as we pass things from one person to another. And so it really needs to be treated as a partnership. And then there are migration costs. We think about processes, and we usually understand our processes. But the same thing goes with the way our data is represented. If we currently represent our price list because someone typed it up back when they still had typewriters and posted it on a wall, and we haven't changed it since then, that organization scheme is probably not going to work well in a system where you want to be able to generate automatic quotes based on customer and project type and language and so forth, or when you want to evaluate potential vendors based on their cost effectiveness in a given situation. You're going to have to add more data to that before you can set up the rules that help you use the system right. And so data migration is not just dumping the data you had in your old system that you didn't like into the new system that you're not going to like 3 months later. Okay? It has to be done with a plan so that you like it 3 months later and it begins to have a return on investment. And the other aspect of counting the cost, though, is understanding the cost of not doing anything. The interesting thing about technology investments is that they very rarely pay off in a single month or a single project or a single customer. And so if you don't really have time this month and there's not enough business to justify it anyway, we'll wait till next month, that's going to be the same story month after month after month, except not quite, because if your customers are making those changes and pretty soon you're more expensive or slower or something, then you won't have the problem of having too much work to do, right? You'll have different problems. And so you will limit your efficiency and you'll limit your flexibility in responding to new kinds of situations. I quoted David Philipp from then from Moravia in my earlier presentation, and he had something interesting to say about this too. He said, you know, machine translation is coming, whether we like it or not, and there are some good things there, but the real key for a language service provider is not using machine translation. It's embedding machine translation in a workflow that allows us to use that seamlessly and efficiently. If you have to open up a file, extract the text, run it through a machine translation program, whether it's Google or anybody else's, pull the target back, get it back in some kind of a context. Oh, wait a minute, what about the translation memory? Do I do that first or later or both? What about, you know, if you're doing all that stuff, then you're not saving any money or time with machine translation. You may as well just skip it. I mean, we already know that there are quality challenges. If it's not saving you anything, then why are you using it? So the key really is being flexible with these new technology opportunities. If you have the right set of translation management tools already, you can integrate machine translation where it matters, where it helps, and you can do that and gain the efficiency. So the other thing that you want to do when you're making this kind of decision is you really want to evaluate your vendors carefully, because you're essentially entrusting your business to them, the quality of their product, the quality of their customer support, the degree to which technical roadmap implement the right other customers' needs. And so you do start by visiting their booth. Let me back up. You started on the other slide by figuring out where you're going and what you want to do, right? You don't let them tell you what you want to do. But once you know what you want to do, you visit their booth and you start trying to figure out whether they even meet the original screening. Goes to their standard demo, but ask awkward questions. If all you do is listen to a demo, it will be the best product ever, right? When have you ever gone through a demo where the salesperson thought it was a bad product? It doesn't happen, does it? But is it a good product for you? Ask awkward problems. Well, what if I have, 78 languages? How long does it take me to set that project up with 78 languages? Oh, well, only 10 minutes per language. Oh, good. Let's see, that's 2 days. So you really need to ask those questions. You want to get, if you're really interested in the product, get a detailed demo that responds to your questions, the kinds of projects you have. You know, what are the things that are hard for you? What are you worried about in this thing? And ask what if discussions. You're partway through this demo and say, well, what if I didn't get this file until later? The customer forgot to send it to me. Oh, well, you have to start over. Not a good answer, okay? But if you don't ask the question, you don't know until it's too late. You can get references, but I would encourage you to be careful about references. Again, looking at that slide from Common Sense Advisory, some of those people that took 2 years, it was their own fault. They didn't plan ahead. They're going to blame it on the vendor. So, and you want to do pilot testing. So in terms of planning for deployment, you really need to look at the configuration carefully. This whole concept of data migration, integration with the other systems, and then how you leverage new capabilities is important. That's what keeps you on the left-hand end of that little chart down there instead of the right end. You want to focus on communication. Internal stakeholders, your own employees, project managers, account managers, but also the external stakeholders that are going to be affected by the system. Training. As an employee of mine once said, if you think training's expensive, try ignorance. Invest in training. Invest in training for your vendors even, not just your own employees. And then plan the cutover. Do you want to do it all at once? Do you want to do it gradually by project or by customer? Do you have a fallback plan? So what I've learned from doing several of these and seeing a few that I didn't do and came in is that this is really hard, especially the deployment. If you think it's easy, you will mess it up. Training matters. The devil's in the details. The right setup will really save you time. These are very powerful tools, but the right setup is not always obvious. You have to really think hard about it. You can't just have some junior person in your organization and say, go set it up. You have to think about what you want. And the right setup does require new processes to take advantage of the power. It's never a good time. We're always busy. If we weren't busy, we wouldn't be talking about making investments anyway. And the priority has to come from the top. If you're the owner, listen carefully to that. If you're not the owner, get your boss to set the priority before you start being a champion. If it doesn't come from the top, it won't get done, and you will fall off the right end of that chart that I used. So that's what I've got. The perfect is the enemy of the good. Don't lose sight of the goal just because there's some problems. There will be problems. I promise you, there will be problems. The challenge is pushing through and achieving the power that they get. So I'll let you, there's some other case studies that are more specific here. I don't think we have time for questions and comments. I sort of ran through a program that was abbreviated from one that takes a full hour. So I'll leave the rest of the time to the other folks. I'm available later if you have questions.